A horror movie about the Backrooms is the last place you'd expect a Christian story about trauma, but that's exactly what this film accidentally portrays. This movie isn't simply an internet meme turned cinematic. It's the story of a man who comes face to face with the physical embodiment of his own rage and trauma. And near the end, we see him devoured by his own self-fulfilling prophecy. That scene is eerily reminiscent of a 200-year-old painting, and there's a Christian parallel to self-fulfilling prophecy that only a few people are starting to notice. And I'm not talking about cheesy Christian rom-coms.
Hey, Scotty. Jesus, man.
When I left the theater on opening night, I realized that this film is an expose on sin disguised as internet horror. The film has two characters, one who struggles with childhood trauma and the other with unbridled rage. So what happens when you enter a place that brings your demons to life? Well, our two characters are about to find out. What first began as a weird image on 4chan became a YouTube series, and now a movie that has raked in over 118 million worldwide on its opening weekend. Everyone has been divided on hating the movie or loving it. The film focuses on Mary, a therapist, and Clark, a struggling businessman. The movie tells a profound message about inner wounds and the tragic tale of what happens when we refuse to let them be healed. And of course, Kane Parsons, the director, is excellent at symbolism. His previous works are riddled with them. Now, this is just one thread I'm pulling on to see where it goes. This movie alludes to many other themes, so I welcome you to join the discussion. By the end of this video, we'll unravel the theme this movie seems to be telling, and by the admission of its director, Kane Parsons, it seems like he may be trying to hint at something more than we've been giving him credit for. I remember discussing this movie with my father on the drive home, and, well, here's what he said. So what did you think?
Like somebody took acid and then thought, I'm gonna write down what I'm thinking.
Jokes aside, hidden behind this well-produced movie is a burning question. We all have our demons, but what happens when you embrace them? Now, if you're like me, you enjoy a movie with thought-provoking questions. Unfortunately, many people walked in expecting a highlight reel of the goofy TikToks that we often see. But what we got instead, and thankfully so, was an exploration of mental health and self-sabotage. And I believe there are some Christian themes to explore here. The film portrays the Backrooms as a place that captures our memories, distorting them the more it tries to remember. The entities in it are warped memories of people and their trauma, and one of the characters later reveals the true nature of these entities. One commenter says, all the rooms are part of someone's old memory. All the entities are a husk that represents one's past trauma that the individual has successfully moved on from. But I would add a caveat there. Sometimes the entities reflect the trauma someone has not moved on from. And something interesting I want to quickly point out here. People all over Twitter are noticing that the last scene is oddly reminiscent of a 200-year-old painting. It all centers around Mary and Clark, two people with two separate problems and eventually two separate endings to the story. We meet our two characters in an office, with both of them sitting across from each other. And it's in this scene that we find out a lot about where our characters are heading. Mary is a therapist, but one with veiled pain. From the outside, she appears stoic and in control. But what's interesting is that, to me, it seemed like sometimes some of her pain peeked through the mask. She's stuck in the past. She still carries a concrete handprint she and her mom made when she was a child. Earlier in the film, we see her at home watching her own television ad for her book, The Window Within. Keep that phrase in mind because windows are a big theme in this movie. Clark, on the other hand, is crushed by the weight of his rage and alcoholism. He wanted to be an architect, but instead he's running a dead furniture store. He works all day to avoid confronting his problems. We enter into the story after he's been kicked out of his house by his wife, who is, frankly, scared for her life because of his unhinged rage. He chalks it up to, well, it must just be how I'm wired. It's clear that this man blames everyone but himself. One reviewer on IMDb notes, his character does not evolve upward. He descends further into his own misery. Now, as a Christian filmmaker, I think many Christians are mistaken in thinking that the horror genre is depraved beyond limits. But this opening of the movie actually tells us that horror can explore some deeply powerful topics. But this movie doesn't give us the answer just yet. No. It strings us along, merely hinting at what is to come. And it isn't long before we see Clark make his first big mistake, entering the Backrooms. Little does he know that this place is about to make his demons come to life. We now enter the part of Clark's journey that will change him for the worst. He's alone, drunk, and watching TV in his store when the power goes out. He goes downstairs to find the breaker, but in the darkness, he sees a line of light phasing through the wall. He walks toward it and trips through the wall. He has now entered the Backrooms. He stumbles around, fascinated by the odd shapes and nonsensical patterns due to his love for architecture. But as he explores, he hears something big. It follows behind him as he scrambles back to the real world. Near the end of the film, we finally see what it is that was following him. Clark visits Mary back for another therapy session. Clark begins explaining his experience, and Mary obviously doesn't believe him. Now, it's implied that between these two scenes, there was a time jump. It's likely been days, weeks, or even months since the first scene in the Backrooms. This film is well executed in many areas. This one could have been improved. Clark is fed up and starts to leave, but just before he does, he says,
"Okay, I'm gonna come back here with proof."
And now we descend into the madness. Literally, we go down a tunnel. He manages to guilt his assistant manager and her boyfriend into helping him out. Skipping ahead, they're now in the Backrooms, and Clark lets her boyfriend down the tunnel. Suddenly, something big attacks him, eating him and dragging him away. Clark and his manager are also dragged down by the rope connected to her boyfriend and are separated. Clark flees through several incredibly designed rooms. The execution on this chase scene was immaculate. In one scene, everything went silent and there was a collective groan in the theater room. It was done very well. It was probably one of my favorite scenes. Clark is eventually cornered in a room and hears his manager yelling on the other side of the wall, pleading with him to help her. Clark sets down the camera and runs to her voice, but suddenly something picks up the camera and starts walking toward him. The scene ends, and after this point, the Clark we know disappears, and the next time we see him, something has drastically changed. The movie is clearly building up to something, but at this point, the theme hasn't fully unraveled yet. However, here's what we know so far. Clark is an angry man trying to escape his failures. In a similar way, whatever is chasing him is deeply connected to his past. And it's not just my opinion. It seems that Kane, the film's director and originator of the Backrooms YouTube series, had a certain problem in mind when he wrote this film. Quote, "A lot of people are now voicing an anxiety about feeling as though they are lacking a purpose or lacking a feeling of connectedness." We can imply here that Clark harbors resentment and shame because he knows deep down that his actions toward his wife were wrong. And wouldn't you know it, he isolates himself at work to prevent himself from confronting it. Isolation, shame, and anxiety are all connected, so it's interesting how Kane's own words seem to back up this perspective. At this point, we enter into a flashback from Mary's troubled childhood. Young Mary creeps toward the window, lifting a paper to peek out, when suddenly her mom jumps into frame, warning her, "Don't go out there. People are no good." Her troubled mother taught her that the window is dangerous, or rather, people are dangerous. Because of this, the Mary we know in the current day is stoic and closed off. Yet, she keeps the physical memento of her childhood. She's built a career trying to heal people while being stuck in the past herself. One commenter says,
"Because she's so troubled, she spends her time and her career and her life trying to help and fix other people."
Now hold on to that, because it's her confrontation with Clark near the end that she finally admits what she's been avoiding. In the present day, Mary wakes up from a dream when the phone rings. She picks up the phone and hears Clark whisper in an eerie voice, "I opened the window." Right then in the theater, I'm thinking, the window to your soul? That's now the second or third time a window has been mentioned in a symbolic context. Fast forward, Mary searches Clark's store to find him. She finds the entrance to the Backrooms, enters the doorway, and goes on a search for him. The sound design as she enters the portal is insane, and I love how they used sound design to build anticipation and tension. Mary finally finds herself cornered to a wall with a childish drawing of the monster on the wall. Inscribed on it is an ominous phrase, "Here and now is a two-way street." Suddenly, Clark calls out behind her. Mary turns and he appears, no worse for wear. "Where are we?" she asks. "The Backrooms is every place that ever was," he responds. One review notes, "It spends a lot of time using the endless hallways as a metaphor for isolation and personal trauma." And you'll see as we continue, this is a common thread throughout the movie. Suddenly, we hear the deep thumps of something in the distance. At that moment, Clark backs up behind Mary and chokes her out. We get a quick flashback of young Mary in a psych ward, watching her inhabilitated mother get wheelchaired away. We now get to the last third of the movie with the now infamous table scene that everybody either loves or hates, or loves to hate. Thematically, I think this is where the message couldn't get any clearer. Clark monologues, describing the Backrooms as a place that remembers what was, and the more it remembers, the less it does. It sounds an awful lot like a distortion of dreams, and if you remember the quote on the wall, perhaps it's where both dreams and trauma intersect. Clark then points to the oddly shaped people in the room, or inaccurate Backrooms lore, still life. Clark says they are improvements on their originals because they can't feel anything. They simply exist. It seems like Clark wishes that he could be the same. Clark then names his own problem. I pushed people away before they could hurt me, but I'm still stuck where I started. Clark has full awareness of his issues, and as we will see in the next scene, the Backrooms mirrors his ugliness on full display. Mary calls him out, finally breaking her stoic facade. Your wife left you because you're whining. How do I stop? Clark asks. Mary replies, I can't help you. It's not up to me. I can't save anyone. And it's here that Mary finally admits what she's been avoiding. The fact it's not in her power to decide whether or not someone chooses to move on. She recognizes that Clark has to take the first step. And ultimately, from my perspective, healing comes from God, not ourselves. Clark knows his sin, the alcoholism, hurting his wife, but he isn't sorry for it. This reminds me of the phrase, men loved darkness rather than light. And that's because Clark has chosen to remain in bondage to his rage instead of letting it go. So what happens when Clark refuses to let go of his demons? Well, they come to life, of course. Mary convinces Clark to let her go. He begins to release her when the monster we saw in the beginning is finally revealed. It enters the room, a giant, disfigured, and ugly version of Clark. But Clark surprises the audience by consoling this copy of him. Mary frantically unties her remaining bonds as the copy picks Clark up. Clark continues to soothe the giant by saying, don't worry, we don't need to change. It's just how we're wired. The copy leans in, and Clark hesitantly does so as well, appearing to go in for a hug. Well, it was quite a surprise for me to see the copy proceed to eat him alive. We hear it happen off screen, the horrible event implied as Mary flees the scene. Now you may have noticed something. This particular scene has an interesting resemblance to a certain painting about Saturn devouring his son. One post on X explains it as an analogy for, quote, trapping yourself in a self-fulfilling prophecy that will consume and kill you. Saturn devours his own son in an attempt to stop the prophecy of being overthrown, only to still be slain. Clark believes that he is unable to change and self-sabotages, resulting in his own still life devouring him. It seems that I'm not the only one that thinks this. Multiple comments and reviews seem to be on the same wavelength when it comes to Clark's story. Clark lets his problems fester and build up pressure. The Backrooms make them come to life, showing him the ugliness of what he's been trying to hide. I think this is a great parallel to Psalm 38, which describes how our sins cause our wounds to fester the more we try to avoid them. And this portrayal of the Backrooms reflects the real world, real people, and real emotions that we experience every day. Clark is angry at everyone but himself, and so is the copy of him. But once Mary calls him out and Clark begins to acknowledge he is part of his problem, something happens. The copy's behavior changes, the embodiment of Clark's rage finally sealing his fate in visceral fashion. The question the movie now poses is, will Mary make the same mistake? The copy chases Mary, dragging Clark's body behind. Mary sprints through room after confusing room, finally, somehow, ending up in Clark's furniture store. But there's one problem. It's not the real world. The windows and exits are sealed off by the same off-yellow wallpaper of the Backrooms. The monster corners Mary, but in a desperate attempt to get away from it, she pulls out the concrete handprint from her childhood and smashes it repeatedly against the copy's head until it breaks. At this point, one commentator notes,
I mean, her using it to fight Clark and it breaking is so obviously on the head metaphorical about her getting over that trauma and letting go of it.
Clark tried to control everyone, but here, Mary decides to let go of the wounds her mentally ill mother caused her. Where Clark needed repentance and refused to do so, Mary takes the first step toward healing. Clark opened the window to his problems and embraced the monster. Mary chose to let go. After this, Mary escapes and is taken back to the real world by a mysterious organization. But let's take a minute to examine what we've explored so far. This film shows you the consequences of giving in to wounds, but also that there's an alternative path. I remember feeling so much anxiety surrounding rejection that I would isolate myself. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy that tore me up from the inside. It's eerily reminiscent of the painting of Saturn devouring his son, doing the very thing that will make your own fears become a reality. My own fears would lead me to sabotage my hopes and dreams. In the film, they caused Clark to self-destruct from the inside out. He prevented himself from becoming the architect he dreamed of. Personally, I have witnessed so much healing in regards to suicidal ideation, and I believe a big part of that is due to God. I found out the hard way that giving in to despair ironically fuels the very thing we fear. One of my past videos tackles this, and it was really beautiful to see people supporting one another in the comments. There's always a way out, and sometimes you just need someone to lean on. Whether you agree with my perspective on all this or not, I found that, at the very least, this film caused me to self-reflect on the drive home. It was excellently produced, and it's unlike any of the normal horror you'd watch. If you have anything to add, please share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear them, and I try to read every comment. If you want to hear about how Netflix accidentally made a Christian movie, check out the pinned comment below. Stay creative. God bless.